Okay, welcome everyone. I hope that you guys had a good Mardi Gras season, and I know you had a good class with Dr. Shaman last week. And the purpose of this class is to springboard off of some that he covered last week, and then of course, hopefully you'll land in a good place so you can tackle some of the components that you're going to be dealing with over the next couple of weeks. So I do want to share a little bit of my screen. Well, I'd like to share the whole part of my screen. So let's see if I can move to my Jamboard right here. Hopefully you can see that. What I've done is I've kind of taken out the activities in this particular course, and I want to illustrate how each one should be adding to or building towards the next one. So when you started off, you actually kind of came in contact with some recent research, and you summarized that research in your activity one. That should have led to the sparking of some kind of ideas about things, which of course would drive your activity two. And it doesn't have to be directly related to what you did in activity one, but it should be at least related to the point where what you started looking at started to influence how you're theorizing about any given issue. Subsequently, there were two research summaries done, and then those two research summaries, hopefully and logically, should have emanated from your theory. That is kind of where things start to come together, where you have some connectivity between those pieces. And then that in and of itself should give you enough of the platform or the foundation for your research project such that you then could take it and answer the questions in the IRB format so someone else could read it to determine, is this project worthy of continuation? Once you kind of get that approved, then you could go deeper into everything. And that's why activity four is an annotated bibliography that should be based on all of the research that you can find related on this certain topic. From there, you would take out one of those articles or a few of those articles on a specific type of tactic. And that becomes kind of your intervention. And you would unpack that tactic completely. And I'll show you a few examples of that. And then you put it all together in the form of a review of literature. So all right. So that is how all the pieces come together up to this point, and they're really how they're going to continue to come together in order for you to have a full-bodied paper at the end of the semester. So any questions about what I'm showing you on the screen right now before we jump to the lit review structure? Sometimes when we go through this process, it's not always linear, right? You kind of start here, and then that makes you go in this direction, and then you kind of do that, and then you realize, well, no, I better head back here. And that is how verbal mediation operates. And what I want you to really think about is the behaviors that you have to engage in as a good researcher are the same behavior you have to engage in as a good behavior analytic practitioner. You have to be able to analyze a situation, determine what the problem is or might be, subsequently find things that have already been tried dealing with that problem. After that, determine what elements of these pieces need to be maybe modified to be more specific to the issue I'm dealing with. Here's exactly what I need to do for this person. Don't know if it's going to work or not. Here's what we're doing, how we're going to do it, how we're collecting the data, and so on. So what you do every day as a behavior analyst is really what you need to learn how to do as a researcher, or vice versa. And those two pathways are really important to be connected, because otherwise you're going to just repeat whatever you've learned in the past, and you won't be able to have the skill set that you're going to need to tackle what the future is going to bring. And being well versed on the things that you've been trained on up to this point is really important, but that's the beginning, not the end. So again, there's a purpose behind how we put all the pieces together. So just keep that in mind. All right. And if you have any questions while I'm pulling up the next document, do not hesitate to ask. All right. Let's stop sharing this now. I'm going to shift to this graphic here. All right, so remember the upside down triangle. Do not forget about the upside down triangle. You should be able to take this and put it over your literature review before you start, while you're writing it, and after you're finished. So keep in mind that the purpose of the literature review is to get you to organize your thoughts in a certain way. And it's supposed to be done before you even decide what your intervention is going to be. And because the process of the review of literature should lead to the possible solution and specifically what you're going to do with your client. So here's kind of the order of events in the literature review. And the reason why it's an upside down triangle is because you always start from a very broad perspective and you end up in a very specific place based on that. So you need to begin with explaining what is the broad problem and why does it matter? What is so important about this issue that you want to address? What's going to happen if it doesn't get addressed? What's going to happen if you're not positioning people to find a solution? What's going to happen if we just throw different things at the problem and not be systematic about how we're going to attack it? Control either outcome, whether it's great or not so great, or those two extremes important enough for the person. And if what we're going to achieve when we successfully address it is that the individual is going to be able to learn differently and acquire more skills and subsequently have that reduce any problem, or is it going to be that the individual can lead a life with more options? So explaining the broad problem is really important. It could even be something that society in general has struggled with being able to answer. But it has to have impact on your participants, all right? So you want to be convincing and credible when you have that introductory statement or statements, letting the reader know what is it that I'm remotely concerned about here and why should you care, all right? You should have a citation there, especially if you introduce any type of definitive statements. And it's my recommendation, don't write in definitive terms, because that's likely how you're thinking, and you should never be thinking in definitive terms. If parents just participate more in homework, the children will have better outcomes. That sounds great, but maybe that's not the case. If that would be the case, then the only kids that would do well would be those kids where the parents are highly involved, and that's definitely not the case. So be careful that you don't attribute something that you're very convinced with as a thing that is definitive. Likely, likelihood, may have an impact. Those things are a little bit more of a better fit of terminology than trying to scare the reader into thinking that something's going to happen. That's not ultimately how credible researchers and practitioners set the stage. So I think it's important to have a citation of why you are trying to convince the reader this is an important issue. So once you actually establish that, and usually that can be done within a paragraph, maybe two, you would then go on to identify published studies that have addressed the broad problem. You might say Guidry and Green reported that when they increased schedules of reinforcement for appropriate behavior, children with self-injurious behavior engaged in that less, or something along those lines. And you would list a variety of researchers who would have done that. So you want to identify as many as you can that have addressed that broad problem. The reason why one is not good enough is because it's telling the reader, and in this case, the reader is me and Dr. Shanman, that you don't know enough about this issue to be able to address it. And you're clueless regarding what other researchers have done. And that might put you, put some irresponsible tools in your hands if that's the route that you're going to go. So there's no way to identify all of the research, but usually I tell people you have to show that you've contacted research at least with 3 or 4 different researchers who have done work in this area. Then once you have identified published studies that have addressed the broad problem, then you actually introduce some studies in detail. You might give examples. You might have specifics on those studies because they are more directly aligned with the participant or participants in your study. All right, so you're taking it up a notch or down a notch, depending on if you're following the triangle or not. And you're being a little bit more specific here. And once you set the stage for that, then you may pull one specific study out. Sometimes it's 2. And sometimes there are none that basically serve to hit the nail on the head with what you would need to do with that client. And sometimes if there are no studies, that might be a relevant point to raise. That is a good reason to do research. But in all likelihood, there's probably 1 or 2 out there, maybe more, that are a little bit even more specific than the ones you discussed, because they kind of are very much aligned with your situation, the participants, the setting, the actual specific issues that are being encountered. And it could certainly be that you replicate one of those. So then that would be the purpose of your study. And you do that because if there's so many things that are alike, why change anything? It could be that you're going to extend one of those more specific studies, because that extension might be where your participant is. It could be you're going to combine a couple of studies. It could be that you're going to take the lead on where the previously published studies left. So basically, they did this work, they found some answers, and then they recommend that for future studies, you look at these certain areas. Nonetheless, the next thing you would do is explicitly describe the purpose of your study and how it may or may not be related to previous studies. So at the very end is where the cross marks are, that when the reader gets there, they should see exactly what it is that you're doing and see exactly how you got there. And to start off with, the first reader is you. You need to see that you can articulate exactly what it is that you're doing and a logical pathway that got you there. Not just because, oh, my supervisor told me that intensive tact instruction, we want to do a project with that. No. First, you decide what are the issues you're dealing with, either behaviors you want to increase or decrease. Then you look at the literature, then you may end up there, but don't try to make the research fit something you just want to do for no other reason. You want to arrive at your possible solution because you've exhausted the process. And I think that's really important to understand that. Otherwise, you're going to learn that peer tutoring and errorless learning and types of things, which may be important tactics for some kids, if those things are just the things you do, then every child's going to get that. And that's not necessarily what we need practitioners to learn. We need practitioners to learn, here is what my data are telling me could be an issue. Here's how I analyze those data. Now, where do I start? And while you don't want to have to reinvent the wheel every time, you want to approach each case from its own standpoint. A lot of times we start with something because it worked for a lot of other kids that are similar and a lot of other similar problems. Great, you're using some data to make that initiation. But that is not certainly always the case. If that would be the case, we probably wouldn't need to have a master's degree or doctoral program in behavior analysis. So really think about that, and I'll put this back up there because I think it is critical that you understand how these pieces fit into each other. All right, do we have any questions about comments, questions, anything that we need to stop the presses with right now? Keep in mind that you're telling a story. You're telling a story so people with a similar skill set as yours will be able to logically see what you started with, how you went down this path, and how you ended up here. That story has to be a credible one. It cannot be based on your opinions, your biases. It has to be one that is objective. And sometimes there's a struggle with trying to get people to get there. I think non-scientific practitioners live off of opinion and biases all the time. Maybe that's great for their fields. Maybe there's not a problem with that in what they're doing. But when you're using a science of something to help people, you can't do that. Now, that's not saying you can't have a professional discourse, a professional opinion, but what is that based on? If it's based on something that's rock solid, then it's a professional opinion based on science, and you're extracting what is the most logical, professional, scientific place to go to. That's quite different than hearing rhetoric that I hear, sometimes when I walk into schools. Oh, I don't think that kids should be given edibles. No, Well, I'm glad that's what you think, because it's the child's behavior that's going to make that final decision, right? We don't project those biases. Um, and oh, I don't think that, you know, you should do the peer tutoring arrangements like that. I'm concerned about a couple of things, but it has nothing to do with the outcomes of those kids. So you hear a lot of that when the responsibility of the professional is not resting within a science, and it could just be willy-nilly like that all of the time. I don't think you want your cardiovascular surgeon to make willy-nilly decisions like that, right? I don't think you'd want the pilot flying their aircraft to make willy-nilly decisions like that, right? Like, you don't want them to fly at 500 miles an hour at an altitude of 10,000 feet, probably because the science tells you that the plane's going to break up into small pieces. Okay, so I want you to think about all of those things and the responsibility that you all have for making sure you adhere to systematic scientific procedures. All right, maybe it would be a good time to take a look at some literature reviews. Now, let me ask you this question. Where's the best to see an example of a literature review?
Can you repeat that? It cut out whenever you were talking.
Where's the best place? Vincent's being a bit patronizing, I think, right now. Where's the best place to see an example of a literature review? In every article you read, everyone has to start off with a review of the literature. Every article you have ever read, to those of you that are taking this class towards the end, every research summary you've done in every class had to be based on an article that the first part, after the abstract, was the literature review. There, on the table, right in front of you. Now, secondly, I can give you some specific examples with people in this class. With that said, maybe not all of the examples are perfect, so I'm not showing them to you because of the content. I'm showing them to you because of the structure. Okay, so you have to meet me there. All right. Oh, that's not the one. Bear with me 1 second. I need to search a little bit differently. I had everything lined up one way, and now it's not looking at it. All right, I think the right ones are starting to get pulled up now. All right, so let's look at this one. This one was about observational learning. So, broad statement, people depend on observational learning for a variety of things in their lives. That's pretty broad, right? Has nothing to do with Heidi Leday's client in Thibodaux, Louisiana, just yet, okay? So we're not talking about something specific to one particular client. You're talking about the phenomenon in general. Individuals watch others when they are not certain of how they should act or react in a multitude of scenarios. We're still broad. And I'm just going to kind of skip around. You could read those next sentences on your own. What people observe in addition to the behaviors of others or the contingencies that are part of their interaction with the outside world. They are subsequently affected by how those interlocking events provide consequences for others. All right, so we kind of talked about observational learning. Now we need to get a little bit more convincing that this is an issue. Well, it's important because individuals are really taught everything may lead to important pieces of one habilitative repertoire. So now we need to kind of talk a little bit about what happens when there's a deficit in observational learning. Deficits in observational learning may be associated with deficits in other areas. All right, so let's look at another example of some broad statements. Stop this. So that was pretty lengthy for just some broad statements to convince the reader that it was a problem, right? Let's go on to some that are not that lengthy. Well, I can't seem to get my alphabet in place here. Are you still seeing the observational learning paper? Okay. All right, let me try this one. Aha, I think I found one that at least is similar. Okay, I think this one comes from this class actually. All right, do you see a document that starts with transitions? All right, super. All right, so let's read through this a little bit. Transitions can account, may account, I'm not going to edit this while we're going, for a large portion of the school day, and they can also become a major source of problematic behavior for children. All right, The use of advanced notice at the tactic. So I think in this example, edited, it went too quickly into the tactic. You would want this to be unpacked a little bit more. What type of problems? How many transitions does someone have to make in school? Is that really a thing? You got to be convincing with that. I also see another problem. The researcher has Brewer here and Brewer here, so we don't have enough support from other researchers. What you're going to do is you may read like 4 or 5 articles, and they all may have one common thread. So when you make a point about that common thread, you would include all of those articles as citations to support what you're saying. It has to be what you're saying and using them to back up what you're saying, not what they're saying. Okay, what I mean by that is it's in your words, not in their words. And you've read it, you've summarized it. This is what you want to say, but you're going to use their citation to support what you're going to say. So you want that whole first paragraph to be dedicated to the broad problem. You don't necessarily want to go into your tactics yet or what have previous researchers done. But notice she unpacks it here, okay? Says what that researcher has done. I have another researcher here. So she kind of did it like that, where each paragraph is a different researcher, which is okay, but you need transitions in order to do that. So when you're ending one, you have to explain to the reader why you're going to the next. And it could be something as simple as Kern and Vondren were not able to evaluate the effects of antecedent warnings. Coate, Thompson, and McKercher in 2005 focused their research on this. And that's how you transition from one to the other. And if there were other people that focused on antecedent warnings, you'd want to cite them also in order to show there's a body of people that are focusing on this. All right, this is a good transition. Similar to the previous study, these guys tested the effects of, so that's a good way to connect that. And this really probably should be towards the end of the literature review because you're getting into some very specific things. And lastly, the current study was conducted, that's the tip of the triangle, in order to extend the previous research listed on the effects of antecedent strategies, as well as the effects of differential reinforcement procedure and the addition of extinction on problem behavior during transitions in a classroom setting. All right, so if you just read that, you know exactly what the reader's going to be doing, the researcher's going to be doing. And if I have any doubts on how they got there, I could go back and see the flow. That makes sense. I see where they connected the dots. That's a cool place to start to try to help someone. All right, any questions thus far? All
I have
right,
one question. That
sure. And does it pay for me to continue to show examples? Is that helpful? Okay. Heidi, I'm listening.
So what would you say, how long would you suggest a literature review to be? Because I'm always confused on if I make it too short or too long.
So for this class, I would try to have 10 references. 8 is probably not going to kill you. 16 might be a lot. Okay. And so I would say that 3 to 5 pages is a good length for this class. I'm not a big stickler about things like that, Heidi. I'm responding that way because in the past, I've found that if it's less than 3 pages, I question whether this person is a competent person to write about what they're writing about. And if it's more than 5 pages, I question sometimes, depending on how it's written, whether it's their own writing or they just cut and pasted a bunch of things from something on here. And also, it starts to go in a lot of different directions. However, I will tell you this, probably in the last 5 years, there was one paper in each category that convinced me that sometimes I'm wrong about that. So there was one paper last year that was 7 pages that was really well done. And I don't think there could have been a way to shorten it. And then I read a paper that was 2.5 pages that was really smartly done. And maybe they could have had a little bit more, but I got it. And I thought that that was a good skill to have to be concise like that when the literature was very confusing on this subject matter. So I'm giving you all of this ambiguity. I'm just telling you overall, since I've been doing this since 2001, I have seen that for this class, 3 to 5 pages is about where you want to be. Okay. Just promise me that don't fool yourself into thinking that more is definitely going to be better. And some of the worst literature reviews I've seen have been 11 pages or more for this class because it didn't tell a story. It was just everything this person knew about inclusive education or everything they could find. I had no idea where they were going. I had no clue if they had the skill set to synthesize published research. And that's so important, Heidi and others, because the answers are in the research. Either it's directly answering it or telling you that we need more research. The answers are there. So if you can't read something and extract out the critical features of that piece of research, it's not going to work. That is an indication to you that I need to think of another career path, maybe. I'm not saying that it should always be easy, and especially in the beginning, but you need to be able to see your progress, because that's where the crux of what we do starts. And so I just don't want to see these lengthy literature reviews that you're trying to convince me you know everything about a subject area. That's not what a literature is about. A literature review is about you telling a story and using the literature to back up that story. And the story is, how did you come to this point with deciding that this is going to be the tactic you will test for this person under these conditions? How did you get there? All right, I hope that was helpful. Any other question? Write them down. I don't want you to lose the opportunity. Let's go over 2 more examples. Then I want to start talking to you about strategies on how to do this. Okay. So let's look at this one. Most individuals learn appropriate skill from watching others. Individuals with ASD and related disorders have deficits in these social skills, leading to issues with social interactions and lack of peer relations. Very general. I think most is important, So for the next sentence, I would be careful about making it sound like all of them do. It is reported that in many cases, right, because all you're going to need is for one person on the spectrum to come out and say, I have 200 friends on Facebook and get along with everybody great. I'm a person diagnosed with autism. That statement is false. And that ruins credibility right there. So according to my friend Josh Plavnik, social perception, and I don't think that needs to be capitalized, all right, is how we observe other individuals' behaviors, discriminate what is relevant, then reinforce the effective behavior. So that's the intro. That's the broad statement. I think it's broad. I think that it's probably sufficient for this class. And now, and a good transition statement. It's important to review these tactics and understanding when and how they may be successful. One way of teaching social interaction is the use of scripts. So that's, again, we're talking about identifying the studies that have broadly addressed the topic. He's talking about that in another study. Now, there are several people who use the script model, and I would have just maybe wanted more than just Krantz and McClanahan's support here. I'd want to see what other script writing researchers are out there. That's helpful. You're not hanging your hat on a piece of thread, all right, that way. All right. Now we've switched interventions. That's fine. Talking about that, a little too heavy on this citation. I can tell you right now, there are several models out there about modeling. And then there's video modeling, peer-based modeling, and so on. Now we've shifted to peer teaching. And again, I think there's a lot of research out there, not just from Utley and Mark Tweed. All right, and lastly, he ends up with what is going to be happening in this study. Now, I am going to make a comment about this. Never use the first person. You would say, in this study, a test was conducted, and you're going to write as if it was already done. You're always going to write in past tense, because by the time a person would read it, it would have been done. All right, so you stay in past tense as much as possible. It's a little awkward for this class because you're not doing it, but this is the only time that's ever going to happen. All right. Okay. Actually, I can't find. Just noticed something, unless I missed it. Oh, wait, maybe did it that way. I see what it did. Okay. If you have a reference in here, it needs to be in, and not even talking about this right now, in your reference section. And if you have a reference in here, it needs to be in your paper. And when I looked at the first one, I didn't remember any Gaylord reference, but it's because he led with the back end of the hyphenated name. That's why I couldn't find it. All right, let's do one more of these and let's start talking about some strategies, because you know me, I'm going to give you some systematic ways of dealing with this. So take it or leave it. All right, let's see what this one's all about. I think I have a few tied up in here. All right. So literature review example number 1, when teaching a new skill to students with developmental delays, with attention to autism spectrum disorders. Okay, again, let's not get into the editing of the sentences. I will do that for your paper, but for right now, it can be necessary to implement a time delay protocol to effectively teach skills that are not in a student's repertoire with near to errorless learning. Okay, that is an example of what I do not want you to do. Can somebody tell me why? Dr. Career used to always tell me you can learn from a non-exemplar. So what is the problem here?
It's a definitive statement with no citation.
That's number 1. Great. They already went to the what first?
The tactic?
Yes. They already started off with the tactic. I don't even know what we're talking about here. I mean, if we're talking about all skills that a person with autism needs to learn has to be done under a time delay procedure, like errorless learning, okay, that's a problem, right? So maybe start off by saying, to teach skills, you may, an individual may not always respond to common instructional practices, right? When they don't respond to common instructional practices, you need to analyze things to determine where a problem may lie. Subsequently, you may choose an intervention that matches with this problem. I don't know, something along, but I think this was an example of a person that wanted to go, they wanted to do a project on tacting and using errorless learning. All right, it just had to be that way. And that's why it always seems contrived. All right, let's see if this one's any different. Phonics and phonemic awareness is an important developmental stepping stone to early learning and vocabulary development in preschool age children. That's broad. That's, information. I don't see a citation, but we could work with that. This particular developmental milestone is fundamental for young emergent readers learning how to read. Some of the skills included in, okay, so that's broad. Research by Cunningham, you put the year behind Cunningham, not at the end of this, shows there is growing evidence that phonemic awareness is causally related to reading achievement at the beginning stages of reading development. Okay, I think that's not a bad way to end the intro. You're still not talking about a tactic yet, right? So that's good. We kind of get, anybody could have read this and kind of got where this person, what they're saying and where they might go. I'm trying to find where they start. He's still kind of talking about the broad brushstroke here, which might be a lot to cover here. All right, look here. There are numerous methods of instruction for teachers to implement when teaching pre-literacy skills. And now they're unpacking contextual instruction. Then they're unpacking direct instruction. Did I mention this? because you might have seen it. According to Howard Gardner's theories, teaching students using a variety of techniques can be a proven method of instruction. That's actually false. Okay. Howard Gardner has a theory about multiple intelligences, that there are some people who are auditory learners, kinesthetic learners, visual learners. It is a theory. There's never been one piece of evidence to support that. What is found is that there might be some people that have more conditioned reinforcement for visual stimuli. However, when you condition up the other modalities, there starts to be more equal distribution of responding. So that's important to note. Most things that are just theory-based without evidence behind it is just that, a theory. But you know what still amazes me about this? In every undergraduate program that I know in psychology or teacher education, they teach multiple intelligences. It's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Like, why are you wasting people's tuition money on that? Like, the way I look at it is, it would probably take forever to teach all the things that have an evidence base. So why waste your time exchanging that for things that's fluff? I'm not saying there's not some interesting things in the theory, maybe even some valuable things that we could test out. But up until this point, there's never been any substantiated information to support that notion. All right, but nonetheless, they included it as part of a thing they were reviewing, just too definitive. All right. So at the end, the results of this literature review indicate that early literacy is important. You wouldn't write it that way. You don't want to be so obvious or obtuse when you're writing a literature review. You can maybe write in summary or collectively, the research indicates that. And then at the end, the purpose of this study was to investigate the effects of music and explicit instruction on. So, wait, I just want to make sure. Yeah, all right. Notice how that is specific, and that is also what he or she referred to towards the end of the literature review. All right, let's just quickly go through this one. Reading comprehension is a critical factor for success in society. May be a critical factor. Many may believe that, okay, reading is necessary in many aspects of life. Look, if there's anything you could be definitive on, it's probably reading. Most people don't grow up as an adult and say, you know what? My life would have been so much better if I would have not have learned how to read. All right, that's probably not. So probably is universally accepted that reading has that much of an impact. But with that said, I don't want you to think definitively like that. A good scientist always leave a door open. You have to be critical and speculative. All right, in order to survive and thrive in today's world, individuals must be able, just don't like the use of the term must. All right, but we get where they're going. They're trying to make a case here, okay? Now we're going into some specifics. So O'Donnell talked about annotating or marking. I would have liked for this person to have found another researcher that looked at annotating or marking the text, okay? Morris talked about passive reading. Rock looked at self-monitoring. Jintendra et al. Extended that self-monitoring The purpose of this study was to investigate if active reading strategies close. So I want to know a little bit more specific. I'm going to assume that if you reviewed self-monitoring so far down, that's in the bottom part of the triangle, that there's something about what you're doing that would have involved that. And for that reason, I want to see that explicit when you are telling the reader what you're doing. All right. Okay, let's stop here and let's take a 5-minute bathroom break. We're going to come back and I'm going to give you some strategies on how to do this. That's not going to be overwhelming. All right. And those of you that are in like ABA 4 or whatever, it shouldn't be, okay? But I'm going to pretend that you're not that far along. And maybe there's some habits I want to reverse with your writing, and this might be a good stage of the game to do that. So let's take a 5-minute bathroom break and we'll come back at 6:05. All right, we're back, guys. Okay. All right. I'm having a dog issue right now. You want to come with me? Or you want to go over there? Okay. See you later. All right. Is everybody back? I kind of see people, but I don't see everyone. Okay, so let's shift into some tips for literature review writing. So, of course, I'm going to recommend you start with the sections based on the framework that I provided in the upside down triangle. Then, excuse me, try to create an outline within each section. So usually it's just words. Then you go back and you start, and those words should be prompts for what you want to fill in the blanks with. Then go back and include bullet points or phrases. It's going to help you to organize the sequence of things. Then you start crafting complete sentences, insert transition statements from one paragraph to the other. I should have put read through it, polish it and rearrange it. You may want to use a thesaurus, like if you find you're using the same word over and over and it's a non-scientific tact, either change it or you don't want it to seem redundant. Make sure you have an APA manual that's accessible to you when you get into some issues. Make sure you review about quotes and how to quote. I would not recommend you use a lot of quotes. Don't write in a way that you're forced to use somebody else's words. Get someone else to read it, and it does not need to be another person that's ABA knowledgeable. I like to get like my neighbor to read stuff. In fact, when I walk out of the house with papers, I think he starts locking his door now. Even though I'm bringing him his mail that was erroneously delivered at my house. So I'm not going to do that anymore. But just ask someone to read what you wrote and then ask them to tell about what you wrote, right? If a layperson can actually give you enough information, that's like, yeah, I wanted somebody to understand that, first of all, when, kids don't develop friends, it's a problem later in life, and that I was going to use script writing to help them start to be social. And they might not get all the scientific pieces, but if they can extract that, then the likelihood of somebody with some knowledge is going to be able to do the same. So I think that's important for this type of work. All right. You can get a classmate to look at it. If you guys have mentors this semester, you could get a mentor to look at it. So I think there's a lot of options there. You will become intimately familiar with it. So you're going to make these mistakes if you're the only editor. You're going to make mistakes like you're going to insert words that are really not there. You're going to pause when you want to pause, even though you don't have the right punctuation, and so on. So I think you should review it. I would not take a whole lot of time. I would set a clock, give yourself so many minutes to write. The clock goes off, go to something else, and then maybe come back to it later. And so one of the self-management pieces is kind of figure out how much you want to write every day and graph it. If you want to write a page a day, give yourself a plus or a minus, then graph that. If you want to, usually the classic way is you just count the number of words you've written. Don't count don't count when you have to put like Thorgenson and Bradford or whatever in parentheses as the authors for something, but all the words that you've written, you could count that. So So use the science to help you not only do the job, but do the job well. Okay. All right. Any questions about this before we shift to the tactic review, which I'm trying to give you all of this on the front side because this is not due until the end of week 8, which would be March 14th. However, I don't start the week of March 8th. All right. Just, you got to run some things at the same time. And if you spread it out that way, and you're not going to be faced with the biggest aversive thing in graduate school is looking up and seeing a blank page. That is the most aversive thing you could have in graduate school. And subsequently, so the faster you get words on a page, then at least you're not starting from zero. Just get something on there and keep shaping it over time. All right. And you're going to be proud of it. And what I'm trying to get you to achieve is something that's going to be useful to you. I don't care about you going through the motions. You could get a good grade in this class. That's not going to be the issue. But do something useful that's beneficial. And that's where all the pieces are going to come together. That part gets truncated. I think it inhibits your learning. Okay. All right. So let's kind of shift into the tactic review. And with this, I want to make this as simple as possible also. Does everybody understand that every time you read an article, there is a tactic in there? And that tactic is your independent variable. There are two major variables in an article or in any piece of research, whether it's formal or informal. The dependent variable are what you're measuring to see if something changed, and your independent variable, which is what you're doing to impact that change. And that's why we call it a functional relationship. Was the change in the dependent variable a function of you implementing the independent variable? Some people use the term intervention. Some people use the term treatment. Some people use the term tactic. Let me kind of discern that. In a research project, it's dependent and independent variable. Boom. In behavior analysis, we use tactic not completely interchangeably with independent variable. We may say something like the independent variable in our study was behavior momentum tactic. That might be how we write it. But in behavior analysis, when we're just having scientific conversations, tactic is the right word, not intervention, because a tactic can be an intervention, but a tactic means that it was derived from a principle of behavior. You could have an intervention that was not. And that's a problem when you're trying to become knowledgeable about the science of behavior. So for example, if I see that Clarissa is upset about something, then I may actually give Clarissa some essential oils to rub on her temples so her rage can be contained. Like the lavender is going to keep the rage inside of her cerebellum. And so that's an intervention, but it's not a tactic. All right. If I tell Clarissa, you know what, you just go back home and take a nap. That's an intervention, right? But it might not necessarily be a tactic. Now, it could be if I'm trying to analyze something and Clarissa is under sleep deprivation for 3 days, and we know that sleep is likely a primary reinforcer for most of us. So she's under deprivation of that, and I want to provide it for her. That's a tactic. But just because she's upset and I'm giving her a prescription to sleep doesn't make that a scientific tactic. And in the field of behavior analysis, it's principles and tactics, and that sits under the problem. It all has to be connected. All right, so in your study, it's the independent variable. What you select for your independent variable should be a tactic. All right. Okay, let's mosey to the tactic review. So in every one of your articles, you have had tactics. They're all your independent variables. And you've done research summaries on those. So what the tactic review is taking out, like let's say you did 6 research summaries on token economy for pre-speakers. Then in a tactic review, you would take the name of the tactic, identify what is some of the earliest pieces of research on that tactic. Why would I use that tactic in general? Why would I use it out of the starting gate? And then how would I use it or modify it when I'm trying to analyze a problem in the context of the learn unit? Just so happens the first example I have is the learn unit, and it says the source of the choice in relation to the learn unit context. Every tactic needs to be related back to that, because that's where you're going to be able to start making the connection to the problem and the principle. And then the next part is how to do it. Step by step, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you finish with what are some more recent supplemental references. And the reason why it's important to look at the references that way, the earliest research will always describe the tactic in the purest form. And supplemental research or more recent research will talk about the tactic variations more. It's important for you to see something in an unadulterated light without interference from anything else, because you need to see clearly how it gets enmeshed with the principles. Later on, there's all these tangents and variations. It's hard to learn a thing when you have to look at all those pieces, but it's important to note that's maybe where we are now. So obviously, I think you can see that this tactic review will help solidify the backside of your literature review, the bottom part of the triangle, because what I'd like for you to do is pick a tactic that's more specific to the problem that you're dealing with and unpack it in this way. It's also going to help tremendously when you do your method section, because you have a whole section on your independent variable and your procedures. So once you do this, you literally can take this information and plug it in there. You wouldn't plug it in this way in literature review, not this stepwise fashion, but you would talk about the studies in your literature review. All right. So let's look at another one, simultaneous stimulus prompt. Came to be known as errorless learning. How is it related to the learn unit? What context? Does it have to do with phylogenetic history? Does it have to do with instructional history? Does it have to do with setting events, motivation, antecedents, responses, consequence, and so on? That helps to isolate where to put it in and what. You're not going to put in a reinforcement strategy if the problem is the antecedent, right? Not directly, at least, that is. So that's why it's important to connect those dots. And we need to see that the right hand knows what the left hand's doing for you. So we talked about that, and then how to implement a simultaneous stimulus prompt step by step. Boom, 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 boom. Then we have alternative and supplemental references. How many do you need? Look, guys, if you have one seminal or primary reference and one alternative ref, that's fine. Might not get 100% A plus, but you'll probably still get an A. Don't just cut and paste like 25 of them. Relevant. All right, let's just do one more. That was odd. I was like, somebody cited me as a reference here. All right, and that does not get you any extra points when you do that, okay? Because I'll never forget this. Somebody reviewed an article that I wrote and it wasn't accurate. And you run the risk of the fact that I'm probably a little bit knowledgeable about the article that I wrote, right? And then this candidate insisted on arguing with me that that's not what I measured in the study, which was a really bad choice of things to do. So just kind of keep that in mind. I've never really understood that. Although I think this candidate, I think was like self-interest, so literally. So anyway, there's that. All right, token reinforcement for academic responding. Some seminal references. Could be outside of the human literature. I have a non-human experiment going on in front of my eyes right now. Right? What is the problem in the context of the Learn unit? How to implement token reinforcement. And then secondary resources. A lot of times our secondary resources are books and our primary resources are articles. That's another way to discriminate. All right, you have this example in Moodle under this week. Don't make this harder than what it needs to be, but I want you to see how it's really nested nicely in the process of everything. Again, go back to the Jamboard that I had going to start off with. You're going to do this tactic review thing on either one of the two or a few articles you reviewed in a recent research activity. One part of your theory could come from something you cited there. Annotated bibliography, research summaries, something you cited in your IRB. It should come out of there. You shouldn't have to start from scratch. You should be able to actually let this emanate from one of the things you think you're pulling over from all of those activities. So it shouldn't be that much of a leap for you. All right, and I think that these two things, these two assignments, you're well over the hump after that. The rest of the pieces fall into place pretty nicely after that. So my recommendation is double down on getting this done the right way in a timely fashion. So then subsequently, the method section and then putting it all together at the end is going to be very stress-free, because you may be having other classes that won't be as stress-free towards the end. All right, so if you need some additional strategies, please reach out and let me know what you're struggling with. Don't wait too long. So you remember when I said one of the most aversive things in graduate school is a blank page? Well, the second most is when you approach the professor the night before the assignment's due with a blank page and you're asking him or her for help, that's the second most aversive situation, right? So avoid that at all cost. All right, we have a few minutes left, so I am happy to take any questions you may have developed since we started class this evening.
I have a question again. So I thought about this while I'm looking at the observational learning tactic review. So since I'm doing my research on listener immersion, I would just pick a tactic that's used while implementing listener immersion, correct?
Well, I would actually do it on the tactic of listener immersion,
Okay.
okay? I wouldn't necessarily do like a tandem tactic with that, all
Mhm.
right? And that's if you are already there where you've gone through the literature and you know that that's what you're going to do, then I would definitely do it on listener immersion. Okay. So for example, Heidi, let's see. I think, can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, let's see if I got it now. That's kind of not what I wanted. Just bear with me. Hmm. It's not letting me pull up what I need to pull up, but I was going to show you an example of one of the immersion tactics. But it's not letting me pull it up. I mean, it looks the same as what we've been. Can you see this one?
Yes.
You see this? All right. Identify 16 listener commands. Arrange the sequence so that the student can predict the order. Suspend other programs, with the exception of verbal behavior programs and conditioning programs. First objective is, that would be kind of similar to, and then suggestions for instructional sets. Set for, these are only suggestions, and so on. So something like that for your tactic review
Okay.
would be sufficient.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question as well.
Yeah.
I'm doing mine on food selectivity, and I haven't read anything about learn units being used for food selectivity. How did the two relate together?
Okay, so here's what you want to think about. Anything that is done in the environment, you could figure out what the learn units are. So you're not looking at learn units for a tactic for food selectivity. You're looking at learn units to kind of measure what's going on with food selectivity. So you take your procedures. So what's the antecedent? Are you presenting a plate of food? Are you using a prompt? And then what's their response? What's the consequence for that response?
If you provide the antecedent correctly, if they respond, plus
All of that, and you're thinking about the context. Is there even motivation for the child to eat something? So you're not looking at the learn unit being used as a tactic per se. You're looking at the learn unit as a way to analyze the problem, which is really how we use it all the time anyway.
Okay, that makes
Does that make sense, Sarah?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And Sarah, in general, when you're trying to analyze anything, whether you're working with a parent, staff, a child, you're going to the movies, anything, you always want to try to fit it into that paradigm, because that's going to give you what you need in order to have a better chance of finding a solution.
Okay, thank you.
Okay? All right, sure. All right. Clarissa,
I have a question.
what problem?
So you said to basically avoid the word intervention. So
When you're writing.
right.
Yeah.
So let's say I was writing on naming where you have the probe phase and you go back to MEI. In the past, I had done something and I used the word, I said intervention phase. Would I need to, even if I define what that intervention phase is, would you still want to avoid that?
No, I don't. I don't think that's you're not talking about the tactic. You're not using that interchangeably with the intervention. What you're saying is that you have a baseline. Technically, the technical word is baseline and treatment phase.
Treatment phase. Okay.
Okay. All right. But
Okay.
right, and that's how you'd use those monikers. You wouldn't necessarily say that the token economy was your treatment. It was your treatment, but it's your treatment because it was a tactic. And this is something I think that in your Cooper textbook, they do a good job of explaining that. Okay.
Okay.
You called my name, Dr. G?
Well, I saw you posted something in the chat room. It said would probably work.
My nap. You gave me a nap. It would probably work.
Nap. Okay. All right. All right.
That would probably be an effective tactic for me personally.
I thought it was part of a sentence like would probably work for food or work for sleep or something like that. All right.
Thank you for checking back.
All right. Sure. I have so many like windows opening up. So I moved the screen and I saw some chat language there. All right. Anything else, guys? Okay. Don't forget to contact me if you need help. Okay. This is the part where people kind of start getting scared because you really have to do something here. Okay. All right. So don't be afraid of that. You have all shown me behavior that you're capable of doing things. All right. Well, let me go take care of the ill-trained canine that I have here. All right. If you guys know of any good behavior analysts that could help me out with that, just let me know. Okay. All right. See you later.